Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Ask Us Anything About ADUs or Accessory Dwelling Units, also known as granny flats, backyard cottages, mother-in-law suites, and many other names. Quick note on our Zoom logistics. This is really a webinar focused on being super organic and open-ended and answering the audience's questions. So it's going to be really interactive. We encourage you to use the Q&A in the screen. I already see questions coming in, which we're so happy to see. We're going to kickstart momentarily with a brief poll just to get some information from all of you, and then we're just going to dive into questions. Really quickly, I'm Renee. I'm the director of the nonprofit Napa Sonoma ADU Center putting on this webinar this evening. And I am so happy to be joined today by my colleague, Scott Johnson, our ADU expert and also the founder of Pocket Housing LLC. Scott and I are joined also by Amity Armstrong, our admin superwoman, doing all of the Zoom logistics behind the scenes for all of us this evening. So major shout out and thank you to Amity. And with that, we're going to go ahead and just dive right in as I see more folks filtering into our webinar. So for those of you who are just joining us, this is our Ask Us Anything webinar. We are the Napa Sonoma ADU Center. We are a nonprofit third-party entity, separate from our local governments and separate from for-profit industry professionals as well. So we're really here to serve as a neutral third-party entity to help you understand and navigate the ADU journey from A to Z to make sure that you're set up for success from step 0 of your accessory dwelling unit process, and really feeling empowered and prepared to tackle a major building project that serves some really wonderful purposes for your family and for our community. So Napa Sonoma ADU Center is supported by Napa Valley Community Foundation. We're a fiscally sponsored project of Napa Valley Community Foundation with support from Community Foundation Sonoma County. And our focus is on getting you technical assistance and expertise about the ADU journey, as I mentioned before. And with that, before we dive into sharing some of that expertise with you, I want to hear a little bit from all of you. So Amity is pulling up a poll here. We're really curious to hear from you what type of ADU build you're considering right now. Perhaps you have no idea. But perhaps you're thinking when you picture your ADU project, oh, traditional stick build construction on my site, that's how you build an ADU. Or perhaps you're curious about prefab options. Maybe you don't know what type under that large umbrella of prefab, but you know you want to do prefab. Or maybe you've seen one of our former webinars. We have a whole library of ADU webinars on our website where we dig into modular prefabs, manufactured and panelized. So if you have a thought already, feel free to let us know of what type of prefab you're interested in. This helps us shape how we answer your questions this evening and where we focus our time as well. Amity, in the meantime, is dropping links in the chat for you. So go ahead and grab those links. She just linked, for example, to that webinar that does a deeper dive into prefab. So it looks like 71% are interested in traditional stick-built construction, and then almost 20% are interested in prefab and don't know the type, and then an additional 8% interested in manufactured and 4% in modular. So we have a mix, a majority interested in traditional stick-built, but a good chunk of folks interested in prefab. And we got some questions about prefab prior to the webinar as well. So we will be answering some questions on that front. All right, let's dive in. Before we get into a bunch of questions, which I hope you all are chatting away into our Q&A box with your questions, I do want to make sure that you're just aware of a few important resources that our nonprofit has to offer and that are available in our community. So Napa Valley Community Foundation partnered with Redwood Credit Union, one of our local credit unions, to develop a really unique and innovative ADU construction loan product that's available for folks in this region. It's a 20-year fixed rate mortgage. It is a, second lien product, and it actually is available at 4.375%, even still from the last I spoke with RCU. Things are always changing, as we know, in this economy, but they've been staying strong with that interest rate. And actually, from what I've heard, they're even open to over 300,000 for these loans. So we're really excited about this product because unlike a lot of other ADU loan products that we've seen on the market, it really allows folks to count as complete future property value from that ADU, as well as future rental income in order to unlock that capital. So this is a product that's going to make financing an ADU more accessible for homeowners who live on a lower and or fixed income and who may not have as much equity in their existing home to draw on. And like I mentioned before, it's a second lien product, which means that you can leave your first mortgage in place and take advantage of that existing interest rate that you have on your mortgage rather than refinancing at a higher interest rate. So we encourage you to reach out to Redwood Credit Union. Sean Charter's contact information there is on our website, on our vendor registry, and inquire, learn more, and see whether or not this is the right fit for you. If not, there's also a lot of finance professionals available, like I said, on our vendor registry. Definitely recommend that you check it out. And with that, I'm actually going to briefly share my screen and walk you through a few other tools available on our website before we dive into all of the wonderful questions that I'm seeing come up here on the screen. So I am going to share with you, this is our tools and resources page. So if you're on our main page and you go up to the menu here, as you can see, you can click tools and resources, and you are going to come to this one landing page where you can see all these different free online tools that we have. Number one, you can schedule a one-on-one feasibility consult with Scott. And this is a really incredible opportunity to make sure that you really get a customized understanding of the cost drivers for your particular project. Really make sure that your goals for your ADU are aligned with the floor plan and the type of ADU or junior ADU that you're considering. Make sure that you have a good grasp of your local rules and what your particular setback requirements are. All kinds of details, really getting into what you need to consider for well and septic, how you can kind of really get a gauge up front on where challenges might arise on your project, and really wonderful opportunities as well. So it's an incredible opportunity. We've done, I want to say, Scott, almost inching towards 300 ADU feasibility consults in our 2 years piloting this program for homeowners. And I think over 70% of the folks that we have surveyed who have gotten a feasibility consult are moving forward with projects. So we're really excited about these as an opportunity. Go to the landing page to learn more and check it out. Another few resources, I mentioned our vendor registry. So I also mentioned our ADU webinar library right here. I mentioned that we have all kinds of tools. This is a really great downloadable, editable budget tracking spreadsheet that you can check out, a building permit checklist. And here is where you can click on that vendor registry and access a bunch of different professionals who can help you, including finance professionals. Speaking of financing, if any of you joined us for our last Ask Us Anything webinar, you know that we ended up spending the entire time talking about the state of California's new Cal HFA pre-development ADU grant. That is a grant, not a loan, a grant of $40,000. And its focus is on helping you cover your costs for all kinds of soft costs and pre-development costs, including septic, that may be required for your ADU project. So if you want to learn more about that, I recommend that you go to the Cal HFA ADU grant program webpage. When you go to this webpage, you'll see a list of lenders. Last I heard, Redwood Credit Union is working on becoming one of these lenders. If you're curious about a local lender that is available to help you steward those funds. And then also we have nonprofits, and the nonprofit that serves our region is HPP Cares. If you go to the HPP Cares ADU grant webpage, you will find up-to-date information about the program. I'm not going to get into more details about the Cal HFA grant. Number one, because we took up our entire Ask Us Anything webinar last month on the topic. And number two, because we aren't administering the grant, other entities are, so it's best for you to connect with them. HPP Cares has a weekly Wednesday webinar that you can sign up for on this website. And you can go to the Cal HFA website to hear directly in real time about what's going on with that grant. Okay, a few more things and then I'm going to shut up. So I want to make sure that you're aware of a new program we recently launched. The goal here is to just make it much easier for you to understand how to connect directly with a really wide range of different designers, architects, and prefab companies for your ADU plans. So definitely check this out. Amity is going to drop the link in the chat. This program, and you can watch a video that does a deeper dive than I'm going to do right now. This program has a diverse range of 50 different ADU plans from multiple different designers and architects. Some of them are pre-reviewed for your jurisdiction. Not going to get into those details now, but if you have questions, let us know. And you can also filter by all kinds of different filters here. So you can filter by the size, by all these really interesting and useful different features like accessible, fire resistive, etc. And then you can click on one of these options and you can get a deep dive into the different plans. This is a plan that is for a micro ADU that's only 150 square feet. One of the reasons I'm excited about this is because it fits on smaller urban lots and because it's much more affordable to build. So if you want to dig in on our website, feel free. You can see a whole gallery of interior and exterior photos, floor plans, information on estimated costs, and you can connect directly with the company that sells this plan kit. You can also, if you want, do a feasibility consult with our nonprofit in advance to make sure that you're going into that conversation with the designer with open eyes about the possibilities and opportunities for your particular budget and your particular parcel and needs. Another example is of a 414 square foot traditional site built plan. I think this one is really beautiful. I think they're all beautiful. And here you can see interior shots of that ADU that's already been built, exterior shots, floor plans, and see more information about estimated costs and connect directly with the designer. So that is our Napa Sonoma Standard Plans program, which we co-designed in partnership with the building officials across all 16 local jurisdictions, so the 14 cities and the 2 unincorporated counties here in Napa and Sonoma region. Final thing I'm going to show you is our ADU calculator tool. When it comes down to it, especially in this economy, it's all about the bottom line, unfortunately, but it's really helpful for that reason to make sure that you have a good sense upfront of what your likely costs are going to be. So this calculator tool allows you to go in and say, I'm going to do modular, I'm going to convert a finished part of my house, I'm going to do new construction, I'm going to do a studio with 1 bathroom that's 400 square feet. And right off the bat, I can already get a sense of the estimated monthly rent, estimated monthly expenses once the unit is built, and the estimated development cost. There's a lot more pieces to this tool that you can input to change the information, and you can get information on how soon you're going to see a return on your investment as well. So that's enough of me talking at all of you, but I wanted to make sure that you are well aware of all of the resources and tools we have for free on our website. And with that, I am going to turn to some of our questions. Scott, I shared some questions with you before the webinar that were sent by some homeowners. Let's start with this question, which is the question that everyone wants to know. How are accessory dwelling units penciling out these days? Like,
That's a really
let's be honest, it's a tough market out there.
Yeah, and it's changed a lot. I mean, we've been around, 2 years, 2 years, 2.5 years, and it really has changed a lot, even in that short time. So the answer is 6 or 8 months ago, almost every option for an ADU, the type, size, location, unless you were in a really, really tough building location, hillside or had, tiger salamander issues or something, almost every option was cash positive as soon as it was rented, and would remain so regardless of how you financed it. That's not the case anymore. With interest rates where they are now, with cost of construction, which has gone up even in the 2 years that we've been around, there are definitely options and uh, combinations that don't pencil. And so it's really important, I think, for homeowners to do as much of research and financial modeling as they can, to figure out, is this going to make sense for them? Because the fact of the matter is, construction is expensive. For a new detached ADU, we're seeing between $400 and $600 a square foot for construction. And then with interest rates in the 6%, some they're on, depending on how much money you have to put into the project and how much you're going to have to finance versus what it could rent for, it may be that at the end of the day, it's costing you $1,900 a month and you're renting it for $1,600 a month. So, using our calculator, getting additional information, talking to potential, banks or lenders or financial institutions to figure out what options are available to you. Um, you really want to be able to try and do as much of that research before you start spending money on a designer or a contractor or your permit, because you want to make sure that the project is going to be successful for your needs.
Thank you so much for that, Scott. And the good news is that the finance professionals on our vendor registry really have expertise with accessory dwelling units and are a really good option. And there are mortgage brokers on there too. So if you want to speak with someone who's not tied to a particular product or a particular institution, to try to get as neutral a perspective as well, that can be really helpful. So what I always say is talk to Scott, do a feasibility consult, talk to a finance professional. Those are some of the first things that you want to be doing before you expend any more time or resources on this. With that said, another thing that I often like to say is we talk to so many homeowners, and we see this in all of the research that have been conducted by academics on accessory dwelling units throughout, the Pacific Northwest, where they've really gained the most traction in the last decade plus in the US. And time again, we see homeowners who just sit on this idea for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Well, costs don't tend to decrease over time, unfortunately. And as we said in our recent newsletter, and a colleague of ours said, that's one of our vendors, building codes change every 3 years. I said 3. I stumbled over my words. Every 3 years, and they are due to change in January of 2023. So now, and as she also said, building codes don't tend to make things less costly.
Yeah.
So if you are interested in an ADU, now is the time. Do a consult with us, talk to a finance professional. If the numbers make sense, then now is the time to really move forward. And if you can get your plans submitted prior to January 1, that is going to ensure at least that you can get a permit in hand that is going to be, what is it, 3 years before the permit expires, right, Scott?
Yeah, for most it's a year, and they often add an additional extension automatically for another year.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
helpful. So think about time and think about how much more money you can return on your investment the sooner you start renting out that ADU, if that is your reason for building the ADU, or how much money you can save in rent expenditures for a family member or yourself if you plan to move into the ADU. Okay, Scott, there were some other questions that I sent,
Yep.
that we got sent. Let's turn to some of those. What was one that really stood out to you?
Well, it's a question I get a lot is people are interested in prefab, as we saw some almost 30% tonight are interested in prefab in one form or another. But it can be hard to figure out how to go about deciding what company to use or what home to buy. And so we were asked, how do you evaluate? What do you look for when you're looking at prefab? And there's a lot of part of it is there's a language issue, is that people call prefab and modular, and there are all these interchangeable terms, and in different parts of the country they mean different things, or they can mean different things. And so the first thing I tell people is make sure that what you're looking at is legal to build as a residence here in California. It has to have a permanent foundation. It has to meet certain building codes, because there are definitely other parts of the country where things like tiny homes on wheels or other more temporary structures can be used longer than they can in California. So California, make sure that what you're going to try and get is legal here. The next one I look for is, most prefab or modular are certified by one of two bodies. It's either at the federal level under HUD, or it's at the state level under HCD. And we call that, under HUD, it's manufactured housing, and on at the state level, it's modular or factory built housing. And those two things, they're designed for permanent foundations. They're built to building codes, standard building codes. They're just certified in the factory. That right there is going to be a lot to get you something that's pretty well built, insulated, meets all the standard requirements.
And I'm
And then,
sharing my screen as you speak, Scott. And the reason why is because I also want to help folks just to get some examples. And this
yeah,
includes for the 70% of people that were considering traditional construction. Um, if you go to the features on the left side of our standard plans program, which Amity has dropped in the chat there, you can actually filter by traditional construction, panelized construction, prefab state certified, or prefab federally certified to get some examples and do some cost comparisons as well. So just in case you want to do another deeper dive into everything Scott is sharing, you can do that right now. And as Scott speaks, I'm actually going to start pulling some up so that you all can see. So I'm going to pull up state certified prefab first.
thank you. Yeah.
Continue, Scott.
So with state certified, and and actually, I started speaking out language. I'm going to define my terms here. When I'm talking about prefab homes or prefab units, for me, what I'm talking about is a completed home. It shows up, it may show up in large pieces, but it's not panelized. It's certified in the factory, and the local jurisdiction doesn't actually inspect the structure itself. The locals will inspect the foundation and inspect, the utility hookup, but the structure itself is inspected and certified elsewhere. That's what I mean by prefab and modular in this case. Panelized is a different game. Also very interesting and some really creative stuff happening in the panelized space these days. I'm going to make Renee flip back and forth between these.
I'm
um,
pulling up panelized
Thank you.
now.
So panels, kit homes, framing packages. Typically, they are partially assembled in a factory, and then they are assembled with local inspections with a local general contractor on site, in some form or another. Prefab allows you to you can save some money over a traditional stick built construction. You can use some interesting new building technologies like SIPs, structurally insulated panels. There's some really interesting work being done with styrofoam and sort of sprayed on stucco for fire prone areas that are happening right now with panelized systems. But I don't think of them in terms of the traditional prefab where the house is actually finished. So with state certified, what it means is that your prefab, your factory built home, your state HCD certified home, arrives typically on a truck or a couple of trucks, depending on its size. But it meets all of California's very specific building codes. California has some of the most strict building codes in the world, and an HCD prefab structure will meet those building codes, including the solar requirements needed for all new residential construction in California, which includes ADUs.
And
So,
Scott,
yeah.
by the way, because we do such a deep dive in a webinar that's already recorded on our website,
Sorry.
Let's keep it to a slightly shorter synopsis
Uh-huh.
for the audience today, just because I
Yeah, okay,
also
thank
don't
you.
want the 70% of people interested in traditional to, you know, be left out.
We'll see if I can synopsize myself. Okay, so
A couple things to consider to make a decision whether you're even interested in further exploring prefab versus traditional. How about? And then
yeah,
as
so
a second piece, a couple things to ask a prefab company when considering them.
the benefits of prefab are not necessarily cost. If you kept apples to apples in terms of construction quality and technology, prefab is going to be about 80 to 90% of the cost of stick built. What you get as a homeowner is typically a much faster time to completion. And many of the prefabs that we have on our list here, many of these prefab companies are what I call turnkey prefab companies, in that they do everything for you. They do the site work, they do the permitting, they do the utility hookups, they manage the whole project. They've done a ton of these ideally. So they really understand their own product and the whole process of getting one built with the minimum amount of pain. That can be different from a custom build where your involvement, there's a lot more of your involvement, which for most people with ADUs, they've got full-time jobs, they've got families. It can be hard to manage a construction project and do everything else that you have to do in your daily life. So prefab can be a great way to get a project done relatively quickly. Pardon me, my dog is escaping my office right now. Relatively quickly and without a lot of your input. To find a good prefab company, the things I always look for is, have they built in your area? Have they built in your town? How many have they actually completed? There are a lot of prefab companies that are sort of startups that are, getting going. In truth, you don't want to be, the guinea pig for their business model. You want to find somebody that's built 10, 20, 50 homes in and around the North Bay area, ideally again in your town, because they're going to have the experience, they're going to have the supply lines to be able to provide a fairly as smooth as anything is in construction, a fairly smooth experience for you. And as you can see, these aren't all just, when I first thought of prefabs, I thought of the temporary classrooms that I grew up going to, all very plain, not very stylish. Prefabs come a long way. There are all different kinds of styles, all different kinds of
And
siding and everything else.
to be clear, right now I'm flipping through the traditional site built,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
earlier I had those diverse different aesthetics of the prefabs.
yeah. And that's our website. You can see all the different kinds. I think there's 20 something or 15 something different prefab, state and federally. Federal, be very quick. They tend to be a little bit less expensive. And they're built to a federal standard. It's not necessarily better or worse than the state standard. It's just different. And so, because of that, they're generally a little less expensive than state certified ADUs.
Thank you so much for that, Scott. And we had a question come up recently about would a prefab unit, I'm asking all the hard questions, would a prefab unit be appraised? So say you wanted to sell your property after you built an ADU on it. Would that prefab unit be appraised at the same value when you sell it as a traditional site built construction? And I know your first answer is going to be it
It
depends.
depends. I gotta trademark that. It depends. So there used to be a really big gap between what people typically used to think of as prefab, which really truly in mobile homes. And mobile homes don't, they don't add a lot of value. They're generally a depreciating asset. They're not equivalent to a traditional stick built house. Prefab today, what we consider prefab in the ADU world with a permanent foundation and everything else, is on parity with a lot of the traditional construction. Now, that said, in terms of building technology, in terms of value, prefabs do, from what we have been told and what it's a little too soon to tell for sure. Prefab ADUs are likely to appraise a little bit less than something that's stick built. That's the same as stick built because there is still a lingering prejudice against the word prefab in some areas. But the truth is, it's only been 2 years since the law changed, or 2.5 years since the law changed for ADUs, and there haven't been enough turnover in properties that have these new 2020 post 2020 ADUs for appraisers to really understand what the value is going to be for any ADU. I mean, we all can assume it's going to add a fair amount of value. It's a rental property. It's all these things that we talk about. But until they actually get the hard numbers of, here's a 3-bedroom, a 3-2 house in Sonoma Valley that sold for this, and here's a similar 3-2 house with an ADU that sold for that. Until they get the comps, they're not really going to know exactly what the valuation is going to be.
Absolutely. That's really helpful. And I think one of the things that's hard is our goal is to be as transparent as possible. And a lot of times that means that our answer is it depends.
It depends.
One of the reasons it's good to do, and now I just sound like a salesperson, but it's good to have a one-on-one talk as well, just because, your particular project and your particular budget and all of that, it's going to be really specific. And I will say, in the interest of being candid and transparent, which is our goal as a nonprofit, Scott and I, or, I don't want to speak for you, Scott, but I think we had some prejudice against HUD manufactured, federally certified ADUs two
Yeah.
years ago when we started doing this work. And our sentiments have genuinely changed significantly. Do you want to speak very briefly to that before we turn to the other questions?
I think we have homeowners here in the attendees who've recently gone through a consult who've probably heard me say this. Like, 2 years ago, I was pretty skeptical of almost all prefab. And then I've seen them
Yeah.
be built. I've been to factories. I've seen them years after they've been built. And I've turned 180. I think for most people, if you can go prefab, you should really consider it. It's a better solution for most people than traditional custom stick built construction. The usually the big challenge for people is, do they have the site access to get the house onto their property? That's often the stopping point for people. But I think everybody should consider it. It's less wasteful, less greenhouse gas. You can often get a better or larger ADU for less money, a little bit. But more often than not, your time in construction and your time to completion where you can turn it into a rental or house your mother-in-law can happen in 60% of the time of a traditional constructed ADU.
Caveat to that, though, because it's never that simple, is the prefab units where they're fully built in a factory off-site have to contend with all of the same supply chain issues that we've all been experiencing when we try to purchase a car or an appliance. And one of the issues with that is factories have the supply chain issue that is, exacerbated by the fact that not only do they have the supply chain issue for the materials, they have to basically get a space on the factory floor for their unit to be built. And so really the timeline for a prefab unit completely depends on the particular prefab company you're working with and that particular prefab company's particular moment in time and
Yeah.
where their supply and demand accordion exists at the moment that you put your deposit down. So that is a key question to ask. Where are you with your actual real-time timelines right now in, September, October 2022? Because the same company that could have turned around a beautiful prefab unit in half the time of a traditional site built 6 months ago might have a year-long wait list right now.
Yeah.
Whereas the other company you talked to that had the year-long wait list, maybe now actually they've gotten through that demand and now they're turning things around even more rapidly. So it's not the answer you want to hear because we can't say, oh yeah, go to this company because they're always going to be faster.
Yeah.
But what we're trying to do is help you understand the questions to ask when you're approaching it. And I also want to say, we are also big lovers of traditional site-built construction. And some of the reasons for that is some parcels just cannot, like Scott said, they're not accessible for a prefab unit that has to be wheeled in or craned in. They're on a slope and it's really hard for sloped parcels. Most prefabs are not going to work on a sloped parcel. And also, there's not as many accessible options. If you're looking for an accessible unit, there is a panelized accessible plan available on our standard plans program. And then there's, of course, just not as much opportunity for customization. Although I will say there is a decent amount of customization available but not so much when it comes to like floor plan, layout, and stuff. So many questions to consider. Let's turn to some more of the questions that we have here. John asks, can I build a 2-story ADU on single family property?
And at the risk of repeating myself, it depends. It's a jurisdiction. In most cases across the two counties that we work in most cases, yes, you can. You are allowed under state law, you are allowed a minimum of 16 feet tall, which is not enough for 2 stories. But many jurisdictions, Petaluma, Santa Rosa, Napa with some oversight, it's typically what you'll see is that they'll say 1 story, 16 feet, no problem, that's what you can do. If you want to go to 2 stories, I mean, I think Petaluma and Santa Rosa allow you to go to 21 and 23 feet respectively, or 27 feet respectively. Um, Places like Napa will say, yes, you can go to 2 stories, but there's a little bit more oversight. We want to have at least, some design review over what that second story is going to look at, because primarily, you're building these backyards. The original map of your neighborhood went through all kind of design review and planning commission review, and now you're thinking about putting a 2-story house in a backyard that could look over somebody's pool or look in someone's bedroom next door, and they want to just have a look at to make sure that you're not going to be looming over somebody's treasured backyard in a way that would be unfair. So they often do a little bit more oversight if you want to go to 2 stories. The other challenge with 2 stories, and I'm actually glad you asked this, John, because this has come up a lot recently. With ADUs, you have less setbacks than any other structure on your property. You can build, in almost all cases, 4 feet from your property line from the side and rear. When you go to 2 stories, the setbacks often increase. So if you have a tight lot and you wanted to build a 2-story to minimize your footprint, you often have to be farther away from your property line in order to do that, and that can pose some interesting design challenges depending on the project.
Scott, without getting into it, because we haven't parsed the new state laws yet,
Yep.
Governor Newsom just signed a slate of new housing laws, which will go into effect January 1st. And one of them does increase the maximum height for ADUs. So
In most cases.
in most
Yeah.
cases, yeah.
Yeah.
So we don't need to get into the details, but again, a good reason to always be thinking about real time. So this is a
Yep.
good reason not to do a feasibility consult where you get all the details about what your local rules are from Scott and then sit on it for 2 years, because then you're going to need to just come back and do another consult because the laws are changing all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. I want to answer Madeline's question because it's somewhat related. What is the minimum ceiling height requirement for an ADU? She's thinking about basement development.
Yep. And this is, again, another fairly common question. It used to be, I believe it was 7.5 feet for most livable spaces and 7 feet for bathrooms. Though I just had this question come up in the city of Napa, and they said that they recently changed it to 7 feet. And I haven't yet gotten confirmation if that's Napa only or if that's statewide, that 7 feet is the minimum ceiling height. So I'm still doing research on that because that just came up last week. But if you're in Napa, it's 7 feet. I believe in every other case, it's probably 7 feet, but it may be 7.5 feet.
Thank you. And John asked a related question. Can you build an ADU over a 2-car garage? Anything that you would caveat your answers with for that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Building over a garage is great for small lots. It's the one I recommend the most for small urban lots. Often we have, 2-car garage is about 440 square feet. You go up to a second story, that's a perfectly livable space for a single person or a couple. Um, Again, the challenges with over a garage are, in almost all cases, you have to add fire sprinklers to the ADU because you're over what they call a utility space. Um, Stairs to get to the second floor uh, don't serve people who have mobility issues. So that can be a challenge for people who are considering for older parents or older relatives or themselves retiring in place. Stairs can pose a problem, but in many cases, it's a really good solution for small lots.
Thank you for that one, Scott. And I want to turn to another question that we got from an audience member prior to the webinar about septic systems. So one of our favorite topics. Might I have to expand or replace my 40-year-old septic system if I wish to add a junior ADU with a bath? My home was once a 3-bedroom. This is like a SAT question. My home was
Math
once a
flashbacks.
yeah. My home was once a 3-bedroom, but is now a 2-bedroom due to a recent 2015 remodel. There's a lot to unpack in that question related to junior ADU with a bath, 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom, bedroom swaps. So, two things. I'm going to let Scott answer it, and I'm going to drop in the chat a very detailed blog post that we have available on our website that does a really deep dive into septic systems. And also, I will just note that there is going to be a state law change with regard to septic systems, but that's getting a little
Someday.
too deep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Inside baseball.
So,
So I'll try
yeah.
and be as quick as I can. So in general, if you're in the county and you're on a septic system, that's your number one question you have to solve first for your ADU project. Similar if you're on if you have a well and you're in a low water available environment, which many areas across Sonoma and Napa have low groundwater availability. Those two things are the first two things you have to look at if you're in a county property. Now, with regards to your exact question, your septic permit is based on the number of bathrooms that you have. So your historic permit would have been a
You mean bedrooms?
bedrooms. So I said bathrooms. Sorry, bedrooms.
I
Going too
think so.
fast. Yeah. So it's based on the number of bedrooms. So your permit would have been at a minimum a 3-bedroom permit before you did your 2015 remodel. So in theory, you now have a spare bedroom on your permit, a paper bedroom, which you can use for an ADU. So you can add an additional bedroom. Now, double check this with your local well and septic agency to be sure, but this is how it would typically work. So you could keep your 2 bedrooms, do a junior ADU, and add another bedroom back to your house, and you should be okay. If you went from a 3 to a 2-bedroom and you wanted to take one of the existing bedrooms and turn that into a junior ADU, you're totally fine with that because you have the permit for that bedroom. So again, there can be some variations in this, but for the most part, what it sounds like you want to do seems reasonable. But start with septic first. Work with in Sonoma County. That's Sonoma County Well and Septic. It's the county agency involved in those things, and in Napa County, it is the Environmental Health Division. Start with them. Get good answers. Get them in writing, and then you can move forward with your project how you want to go. Oh,
I'm muted. Thank you for that, Scott. Um, Related question from DK. How can we get, and this is getting into policy, but how can we get county rules changed so we don't have to put out thousands of dollars before knowing if we will be approved to build an ADU? So two things, Scott. Number one, okay, let's not get too deep into policy, but
you know me
if
so
people,
well.
yeah, if folk, or what I mean is policy advocacy, but
Uh-huh.
now is the time that we can give public comment to our local jurisdictions. Napa Sonoma ADU Center is doing a lot of work behind the scenes, advising Sonoma County, advising Napa County, advising all of our cities about this very question, DK. So never fear, there are people whose full-time jobs, we really are working on these things. If you want to get involved or know how to submit a public comment, reach out to our local nonprofit Generation Housing. And if it's ADU specific, reach out to us. And both of us can help you with that. So, Scott, two things. DK's question is a little scary for everyone on this webinar to hear, probably. So, can you both answer his question honestly and allay
Yep.
any fears that question? Thanks. Can you do
Yeah.
all of it in one answer?
I'll give myself 2 minutes. All right, let's go. So yeah, exactly. Contact the county, contact Generation Housing, contact us. The other half of what we do beyond working with homeowners is we work with jurisdictions to try and make this stuff easier for homeowners to get these things permitted. That's a key component of what we are up to.
And we just had a chat with them about this very topic.
We just did. And so the counties are aware and the jurisdictions are aware that their old processes don't necessarily serve ADUs as well as they could, and we are there to point it out gently to them. Hey, you could change this. So contact your board of supervisors, contact your city councils, comment on public comment periods, on general plan stuff. All of that matters. And we are in a period of honestly, I've been in land use planning for 20 something years now. We are in a period of very rapid change in an era that doesn't change very rapidly. I mean, there's a bunch of new bills that got signed today that completely changed the planning landscape of California. So things are changing, but they aren't changing fast enough for most people, which I totally understand. The what you can do to prevent spending thousands before you know if you'll be approved for building an ADU is uh, what you can do is do as much research as possible. Do a consultation, talk to a designer, talk to as many people in the industry as possible, have a conversation with your jurisdiction, talk to the planning department, and especially talk to the building department, and try and get as much information as possible because other than building codes, if you are within the parameters that the state law has set for ADUs, it's what's called ministerial. They have to, septic isn't, it's another issue. Septic and well are different issues, and that's a whole nother ball of wax. But it's ministerial, which means that if you satisfy the criteria, they have to say yes. So doing your research, and a lot of it can be relatively free, can get you pretty close to saying, okay, I'm 80% sure this is going to pass, or 90% sure this is going to pass. And that before you even really get to the point of starting to spend money. So it's research, it's communication, it's doing the legwork of due diligence to figure out if your project is going to be viable or not, and that can get you pretty close to it. And we're working on that last bit.
Thanks for that, Scott. And I think Jessica's question is a good one, right after that one. So has Sonoma County PRMD, the old name for Permit Sonoma, so the jurisdiction government agency in charge of all ADU permit applications in unincorporated Sonoma County, have they streamlined the permitting process for ADUs?
Their process is already, believe it or not, their process is already fairly streamlined when it comes to ADUs. And we've been in discussions with them of providing suggestions for other things they can do, and other agencies that are input on the process to streamline it further. And one of the things that we've worked on, we've created, was the standard plans program that Renee showed you. We're working on having pre-reviewed plans approved by the county, or not approved, reviewed by the county, so that they'll be able to go through the permitting process faster than plans that are brand new to the county. And so that's part of our standard plans program that was on that gallery website that Renee showed you. So that's coming online as we speak. We actually, I think, have 14 some odd plans in there now, and more will be coming on in the next month or two. So we're working on it. There's always going to be red tape. There's always going to be a process, but it's definitely faster, certainly, than it was 2 years ago. It's even faster than it was 18 months ago. So yes, we're working on it.
Thanks for that, Scott. And, you know, I have been reading some of the state HCD, the agency that is in charge of reviewing and approving each California city and county's plans for updating their programs and policies around housing, including ADUs. And one of the things that the state recently responded to one of our local cities was, we changed the ADU laws in January 2020 to make it so that it's easier in every city and county to build an ADU. And that was the baseline. And we expect you to raise the bar with your policies and programs. We don't want you to just do what the state has mandated. We want you to think above and beyond how we can help individual homeowners who want to build ADUs. So this is a conversation that is absolutely happening at the city and county level. We talk every day with really wonderful folks at Permit Sonoma, at all of the agencies, planning, building, etc., that really want to improve their planning and permitting processes. There have been a lot of staffing shortages that have really made it even more challenging. And what I can say is things are continuing to look up. All of us would have liked them to be better yesterday. So we're constantly working on further improvements, but things are at the very least looking better with each passing month. So that is a positive. Scott, I'm looking at Jessica's question.
Yep,
Is
that's
a
a great
new,
question.
and let's frame actually this question a little bit for the audience with recognition that we only have 10 more minutes. And I do want to make sure we get to everyone's question actually. So all I'm going to say is thinking about utilities is one of the first things that you need to think about for your ADU project. And in for example, if you did an ADU consult with Scott, one of the first things that he is going to go over with you is the utilities and what you need to be asking yourself and what the cost drivers are going to be and what the opportunities are for your particular ADU project when it comes to the utilities. With that, Jessica's question is a new sewer lateral required when adding an ADU to a property, or can the ADU be linked to the primary residence?
Yeah, great question. And for those who aren't aware, a sewer lateral is literally the pipe in the ground that runs from the property to the sewer main in the street, or at the other edge of the property. So it's how your house connects to the greater sewer system. The short answer is in most cases no. And I'm trying not to say it depends. If in most jurisdictions, a new sewer lateral is not required, and a new water lateral is not required, and a separate electrical connection is not required. However, there are some, Santa Rosa comes to mind, where in their code they say if your ADU is going to be over 750 square feet, that they can require it of you depending on your project. So usually no, and it's what I recommend for most people, because a second lateral, water, sewer, those are very expensive. Tens and tens of thousands of dollars and extra permits and all kinds of stuff. So if you can avoid it, I would. The downside of not going for a new water lateral and sewer lateral is that you don't get a separate meter and a separate account with the utility for your renters. You're going to have to figure out sub meters or flat rate for your utilities or some other methodology to deal with the utility cost of running the ADU.
Thank you for that, Scott. Let's turn to Martha's question. How many square feet needs to be separate from the main house?
Yeah, so interesting question, Martha. The shortest answer is no square feet need to be separate from the main house, as opposed to if I'm talking about a separate building. You can do a junior ADU, which comes from existing space within your house, and those can be up to 500 square feet. You can convert part of your interior house into an ADU, anywhere from 150 to 50% of the square footage of your main house. You can do an attached ADU, which is an extension onto your house, and then of course you can do a detached ADU. You can do a garage conversion. You can do it above the garage. All those, there is no distinction about does it have to be separated from your main house. If it's not a junior ADU, and I want to make sure I'm getting both possible answers here. If it's not a junior ADU, it can't have a connecting door between the ADU and the main house. So in that sense, it is separate from the main house. You can't have an interior door between the two. If it is a junior ADU, if it's 500 square feet or less, and it's made from area within the existing house, then you can have a connecting door, an interior door that's lockable, obviously, to your junior ADU. I think I got
Thank
all
you.
the aspects of that one.
Thank you for that, Scott. And Martha also asked how she can sign up for an ADU feasibility consult. So you can sign up at the link that I just dropped in the chat. And I just want to, since it's come up several times, I'll just give a little bit more detail about the feasibility consults. So the feasibility consult consists of 4 parts. Number 1, Scott does research on your parcel to make sure that you're eligible to build an ADU. After he does that research on your parcel, he lets you know he's done the pre-screening research and you can sign up for a consult. The consult is an hour-long one-on-one meeting with Scott over Zoom, where he goes over what he's researched on your parcel, what your goals are, what your budget is, what the cost drivers are, all kinds of issues that are really tailored to your specific needs, wants, fears, anxieties, excitement. And then coming out of that hour-long meeting, he then puts together a customized report. It has a ton of detail in it. It's about 25 pages long, and it's going to have things like estimated timeline for your project, estimated costs depending on cost drivers for your parcel and what our ADU calculator estimates, a list of the types of professionals that you will need for your particular project and what their roles and responsibilities are. all kinds of details about the local rules that are applicable to your particular project, right? So all the types of questions that are being asked here, but in even more depth and detail. And then finally, if you do an ADU feasibility consult, then you are eligible to join us any week, any Tuesday or Friday from 12 to 1 in open ADU office hours, just like this, where it's me, you, and Scott, and any other homeowners that join. And it tends to be 1 or 2 people at a time. So it's not a big webinar like this. And you have us at your beck and call for an hour every Tuesday and Friday from 12 to 1 to continue answering your questions over the course of your entire ADU journey. So that is what an ADU feasibility consult is. You can sign up at the chat. Let's turn to Jeffrey's question. Any issues seen with turning a detached garage into a 500 square foot studio ADU? The garage is built already. Then also add a 2-bed, 1-bath, 900 square foot ADU in the back half of the property. The property is in Napa County, but on city water and septic.
Okay. Yes, there is. Unless your property is zoned multifamily, you are allowed 1 detached ADU. You're allowed 1 junior ADU, but again, that comes from area from within the primary residence, and sometimes an attached garage. But with a detached garage, you have to make your choice between, do you convert the garage or do you build the 900 square foot cottage, because you only get 1 of those.
Thank you for that. Okay, let's turn to Jessica's question. Going back to her prior question about the sewer lateral, does this apply to well as well?
Yep, for water, I mean, for a well, you may want to come off of the wellhead as opposed to tee off the house, but you can, depending on the logistics of your site, it depends. It can come off the main house, or if you have a water spigot in the yard, provided that it's enough feed for the ADU. Yeah, you absolutely can have a second connection to a well, or a second connection to, if you have city water, same thing. You can tee off the main house.
Thank you for that, Scott.
There is a wrinkle. Fire sprinklers. If you build over a garage and required to have fire sprinklers, if you have a house that is built, I think post 2011, and you have fire sprinklers in the main house, you have to have fire sprinklers for the ADU as well. Other than that, you generally don't. But if you're required to do fire sprinklers, the amount of water fire sprinklers go through when they go can often overwhelm existing water laterals to residential properties. So if you, and this is one of those, there's a tons of possibilities here, but if you trigger fire sprinklers, and particularly if you have an older mid-century property, you may run into issues with not having enough water supply for your property. But that's a pretty edge case, as all ADUs tend to be an edge case in some form or another.
Thank you for that, Scott. Let's get Tom's question answered before we reach the end of the webinar. I have a vacant lot in Monte Rio, zoned a single residence and guest house. If I only wanted a small house, can I only build the guest house and not the single family residence? A couple things to unpack there with regard to definitions. So a guest house is not the same thing as an accessory dwelling unit. So guest house doesn't have to have a kitchen, but we are not experts in guest houses. So just going to set that aside. But I'm going to assume he's asking about an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit. That's what I'm assuming he's asking. So do you want to answer that question, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I can see it sort of answered two possible ways. If you only wanted to build a small house and not include an ADU or a guest house, you absolutely can. You can build just a small house, and single family home isn't determinate on size. You can build a very small single family house, and but you do have to have a primary residence. Anything that you permit for that property to be a house, the first one that gets built is going to be the single family residence, the primary residence, and anything that gets built after that could either be a guest house or an ADU, depending on how you want to permit it. But by definition, the first house you build on the property is going to be a single family residence.
And you can change later. So a lot of fire rebuilds, they ask us, can we build the ADU before the primary house? No, but you can build what will become the ADU first, permit it as the primary house, and then convert it to an ADU when you have the time and money to build the primary house.
Yep.
Okay, we actually have one final question. Let's try to get to it.
I can get it.
Okay, go for it.
I have an existing partially converted drywall flooring, 300 square foot garage that is set close to the property line. Will it be allowed? The short answer is yes. If you convert an existing structure, setbacks don't apply. Um, the restrictions are you can't make it any larger or taller than it is, with the exception that you can add 150 square feet for a front door area. Ingress, egress is what they call it. But conversions can ignore setbacks. So it can be on the property line and you can convert that structure as long as the footprint stays the same.
Thank you, Scott. And we actually featured a real story of a homeowner who lives in the city of Napa who actually converted an existing structure that was within the normally allowable setback, so really close to his rear property line. His name's Kyle. You can see a whole video of his ADU and him talking about his experience getting an ADU feasibility consult, his experience with the ADU process overall. Amity actually shared a link to that recorded webinar available on our website. Anthony just asked, can you email replay? The recording for this webinar is going to be available on our website and will be sent out in our next newsletter. So yes, this recording will be available on our website in our webinar library. Sorry, I'm trying to read questions. Barbara, how do I get a feasibility consult? It's linked in the chat. And you can also always reach out to us, and I'm sending it to you right here. Amity just linked to it. Okay, Amity, let's pull up our slides and close out. Thank you all so much. It was so fun to join you all this evening. Scott and Amity and I really love getting to interact with all of you, getting to answer all of your very insightful and intelligent and thoughtful questions. We know that building an ADU is a really big financial investment that can be scary and that can be really exciting. And our goal is to reduce the uncertainty and reduce your risk so that you can go into it with eyes wide open and end up with a unit that's really going to meet the needs of your family and yourself. So thank you so much for joining us. We welcome you to reach out to us. Go to our website, napasonomaadu.org, and click the little red Get Started button in the upper right-hand corner. If you click that button, there's two options when you do. One is contact us with any questions, and two is sign up for a feasibility consult. Either way, we're here to help you. It's our pleasure to get to chat with all of you this evening, and stay tuned for our next webinar. It will be announced in our newsletter. Take care, everyone, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott and Amity.